Welcome to the first edition of the Sporting Eyes show for 2025. I've been working on this for a little while, so I'm pretty excited to get it up and running. Now, as for right now, I'll be uploading this series every Monday and Thursday, and I might expand upon that when the season gets started. Without any further ado, let's go into our first topic, and it's to do with Jamarra Ugle-Hagan. Now, this hits close to home for me as a lifelong diehard Western Bulldog fan, and his ongoing issues are obviously a big concern. Now, we can speculate about what they are, whether it's substance abuse issues, alcohol, or family matters. It could be a combination of all three of them. But I think the really important question that we need to get answers is, has his sabbatical away from the club been by his own admission or by the club? I think the answer to that tells us a lot. If the club and leadership group have sent him away, I think it shows that his behaviour and professionalism isn't at the level. But if he himself and his management have decided to step away, then I think that shows that these issues really are very deep and personal and probably more related to his family. Now, I think we all think we know the answer, that it's probably the club that has told him to stay away, but until we get that answer, I think it's still pretty open at this stage, and that's not good for the Western Bulldogs. Now, Jamarra has improved every year in his goal tally. He went from 7 goals to 18 to 35 and kicked 43 goals last year and was top 5 in total shots at goal. So he probably should have kicked 50 plus if his accuracy was better. But if there's a team that can replace Jamarra or can ease into the season without him, it is the Western Bulldogs. Now, as a fan, I actually hope that they go a bit smaller with just Norton and Darcy and trial that for at least the first month or two of the season and then see kind of what happens with Jamarra. But they can cover him. They have Lob in defence who can go forward. They have young Jordan Croft and Ryan Gardner who've been playing up forward if they want to go with the third tall. But the bigger deal with this as a fan, and I think a lot of you guys watching, is the off-field distraction. There's always off-field talk about the Bulldogs. A lot of it's negative, and this adds to that. It's the 100th year of the club. Luke Beveridge is out of contract, and this is not what they needed. One of their rising stars or star players missing in action with a whole bunch of rumours, most of which are negative. So that's the biggest concern for me, and I think the club's biggest concern is actually off the field, because whenever you have an indefinite timeline, there are always problems around that. But I want to move on to another football club that's had off-field issues, a few of which, and that's the Carlton Football Club. Now, the news came out at the time of recording this, Thursday morning, that Luke Sayers has stepped down as president. Now, when you pair that with Sam Walsh, who's still recovering from his hamstring issue, and Nick Newman, who's out for the season with a knee, all three of those things are not good. Now, in isolation, I think they're all solvable problems. Now, they have Brian Cook and Graham Wright at Carlton, so they have experienced senior officials to figure out what to do with this presidency. So I think they can solve that. Nick Newman, they have a lot of defenders, Carlton. They can put Zach Williams back. They have Lockie Cowan. They're obviously getting Jack Silvani back. So I think they can cover Newman, not specifically his role, but they do have bodies in defence to cover him. And Sam Walsh is the one who's really hard to cover. I mean, they just lost Matt Kennedy to the Bulldogs. So you really only leaves them with Cripps, Adam Chera, who's injury prone, rookie Jagger Smith. So without Sam Walsh, the firepower in the midfield is limited, and all they can really do, I guess, is put George Hewitt in, who was sub a lot last year, and hope he can get the job done. So in theory, all three of these things are solvable issues entering the year, but Carlton, who were at times last year the best team, you could argue they were definitely a top 3 team up to about round 15 or 16 before they get injuries. I think a lot of people think that going into this year, they will start the year in that form. But with these three things adding up, I think it brings Carlton further back with the pack. Again, in isolation, you can solve them on paper, but it's not the way Carlton wanted to start the pre-season or start the season. And it's a few more headaches for Michael Voss. So I think Carlton are just back with the pack a little bit more instead of extending out to being maybe a top 4 side like a lot of people predicted they might be about a week ago. But talking about top 4 and top 8 sides, Up next is the Eyes 8, the best 8 teams in the AFL. Alright, it's now time for the Eyes 8. Now I need to make this clear, this is not a ladder prediction at all, or predicting the wins and losses of all these clubs. It's just a power rankings of the top 8 teams right now. Now, the plan is to update this probably in a month, and then I'll update it at the end of every round till we get to the round 24 and the finale of the season, and then we can update it during finals. But number 8, to get it started, is the Western Bulldogs. Now I originally had them ranked 5, but with the Jamarra Ugle-Hagan distraction, especially the off-field part, they dropped down to 8. But I like what they did in the off-season. They get in Kennedy as another big-bodied midfielder, and then they continue on what they did from last year, which made them one of the better teams in the back half of the season. Lobb stays in defence, another pre-season in the midfield for Ed Richards, so I think the Bulldogs are pretty stable even with the Jamarra Ugle-Hagan issues. Number 7, Fremantle. Again, they would be higher, but with the recent news of Sean Darcy going over to Qatar, which we will also get to later in this show, it just leaves them without one of their 3 key pillars in Alex Pearce and Josh Tracy as the other 2. Now we saw all 3 of those guys were out in the final month of last year, and I think that cost them finals. So they get 2 of those guys back. Not too worried about Fife and Walters who have had injury issues, because I think they're past their best. I'm not even sure they get into this pretty strong Fremantle side, but it's a young team, plays in their prime. You add Shai Bolton. I like the Dockers at 7. Number 6 is the grand final runner-ups in Sydney. Now people are going to have them and Port Adelaide dropping. Now I don't have Port Adelaide in the top 8 at all, and Sydney are also big droppers. I'm a little worried about their forward half with Amati and McDonald. I'm not sure they're trustable. And if you decide as Dean Cox, their new coach, to put Tom McCartan forward, then I think it leaves their defence really vulnerable. But as long as you have Chad Warner, Isaac Heaney and Errol Goulden, you're going to win a lot of games, you're going to beat a lot of bad teams, so I like Sydney at 6. At number 5, they're crosstown rivals in the GWS Giants. They should have played in a preliminary final, let's be honest. They blew the qualifying final, and they really blew the semi-final against Brisbane when they should have cruised home. But I like what Adam Kingsley's done. They're built for the modern game, a bunch of high quality small forwards, high half forwards. I think their midfield is aging a little bit, especially when you lose a guy like James Peatling who was growing. So it leaves Tom Green in there as the main guy who's under 25. So I think their midfield might be a bit of a concern, but that forward line's so damaging. Throw in the power of Jake Stringer, who might be able to win them 2 or 3 games in the home and away season. I think the Giants deserve to be 5th. Now the easiest side to put at 4 is Geelong. The best coach, stable organisation, and you add Bailey Smith into the midfield to give them a bit of pace. Now I'm not the biggest Bailey Smith fan because of his skill, but when you can run and you have the running power and strength that he has, it would only help them in the on-ball unit with Max Holmes, Dangerfield, and hopefully the return of veteran Cam Guthrie. But Geelong are easy to put at 4 because we know what we're going to get. They play the game the right way in the modern game with those high half forwards getting up and running back. So I really like Geelong at 4. Number 3, I have to put Hawthorn. Now, depending on what side of the fence you sit, people are ice cold on Hawthorn and people are red hot on Hawthorn, and I'm red hot. Again, I just think they're built for the modern game. Look at their list. It's still pretty young. They have veterans at either end of the ground. Young midfield with Newcomb, Warple, and even Connor Nash, who is really good. And Lloyd Meek, who broke out and was a real power ruckman for the back half of the year and dominated in the elimination final. But in the modern game, you need speed, skill, and fitness. They have all 3 of those things in every level. And when a guy like Josh Weddle, who I think in a lot of teams would be a star midfielder, he's just a role player in defence for Hawthorn. That's how deep this squad is. So I like Hawthorn. Again, one of the best young coaches in Sam Mitchell. For me, I think they'll continue on the height, and I've got them at 3. Number 2, the Brisbane Lions. I would have put them at 1, but Joe Danaher retiring is a big blow, and it leaves a young Logan Morris, who I think will be a star, and Eric Hipwood as the only 2 key forward targets. But this team is still loaded. You're getting Levi Ashcroft, who you think will play straight away. Sam Marshall as well is another academy player. I'm not sure he'll play. But again, everyone's in their prime in this team. Even Dane Zorko, who I think will be 36, just about had his career best year in defence. Lachie Neale's still in his prime, and I know I touched on that they lose Danaher, but when you have a forward line of Rayner, Bailey, Charlie Cameron, Callum Archie who emerge, it's loaded with talent, so I have to put Brisbane at number 2. So the number 1 team as of right now is the Collingwood Football Club. I think the best 22 or 23 on paper is Collingwood. You add Harry Perryman, experienced midfield defender. I'm not sure what he'll play right now. It's probably more likely to be as an on-baller. And then you have Dan Houston, who comes in, all-Australian caliber defender, and again, he can play in the midfield if needed. And then you top up with a guy like Tim Membry, who at best might be able to kick them 30 to 40 goals, and at worst will be pretty good depth if they have forward injuries. But I love this Collingwood team. Experienced veteran, reminds me of the 2022 Geelong team. The only asterisk I have to put is if they get 4 or 5 cluster injuries in the midfield, defence or forward, their depth is horrific. It's probably bottom 4, bottom 5 depth in the competition. So there's the little asterisk with Collingwood. But I think on paper right now they are the best 22, 23 with a sub. So Collingwood is my number 1 team. So that's the Eyes 8. We'll keep track of it, and I'll probably do it either before the pre-season games in February or maybe a bit after. But for right now, let's have a look at what's going on with Fremantle and their big ruckman in Sean Darcy. So the final thing I wanted to discuss in this video is to do with Fremantle and their star ruckman Sean Darcy. Now, in most businesses, you often have to take a big chance, a big risk, a big investment to try and get successful, and sometimes it can leave you broke and with nothing. And Fremantle did this in football terms with Sean Darcy, who they signed till 2030, and even before that, using a lot of draft capital to get in Luke Jackson and sign him to a long-term deal. So this has been the Fremantle Football Club, big investment if we make them into a business. And so far, has it completely flopped? Well, not really, because they've played a little over 40 games together, and their win percentage is above 50%, which is important. So on field, it hasn't been a catastrophe. But it's never really gotten the chance to breathe for an entire season. I think the most games they've played together is around 10. And again, they've gone about 50% in those games, a 50% win rate in those games. But a lot of it's on Sean Darcy. It's interesting that the club in the off-season asked Luke Jackson to put on weight, which to me signifies they want him to play a little more ruck time and maybe put Darcy forward. Or maybe that's insurance because they know that there's some problems with Darcy and that left knee. Now in the club statement they said that there was really nothing to look at, that they were going over there to get kind of new special treatment, have a specialist look at him to make sure he can't injure his left knee again. So they made it look like it was more for injury prevention, this trip to Qatar. But if you read between the lines, I think at the most critical juncture of pre-season, when one of your best players isn't there, there are problems with his left knee. So Fremantle's taken this big swing. I'm not sure if they've told Darcy to lose weight before or try and get a bit fitter. I'm not sure. Maybe he's just not that invested in being a really high-level professional footballer. Or maybe the injuries have stopped him from doing a lot more running and shedding the weight, like we saw Max Gawn do maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where he really slimmed down. It's also difficult with Darcy because his power, his strength, is his biggest strength. It's also his biggest weakness. So that's a complication as well. But Fremantle have taken this big swing. They want to get a home run above the rest of the competition, but right now it's fallen flat, and this is another concerning layer to it. Thank you for watching the first edition of the Sporting Eyes show for 2025. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see all of you guys on Monday.